right, so ready? We're ready. We're marching into recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Okay.
Very good.
Let's take a look. We got Ryan Wade with us. We're going to be talking about momentum. How to build it, how to keep it, how to get it back if you lost it. So we're going to start with, what is momentum? How would you describe momentum in recovery?
Yeah, I think momentum in recovery or momentum in just life is super important. And I find in my recovery journey that anything that I can apply to my recovery journey in the 12 steps, I can also apply outside of the rooms and in the real life world, which I think is amazing. And I believe that's one of the greatest gifts of sobriety, is it really does give you a roadmap of how you can live your life. With momentum in recovery, it looks different to everyone, but I think it just starts with putting one foot in front of the other and building a solid foundation. I was just at my H&I commitment, hospitals and institutions, for those of you who don't know, last night at Buena Vista here in town, and I was speaking to the group about, me also being in their seats so many times. Just every time I'm in rehab, I would sit there and I would say, when I get out of here, I'm gonna be the best boyfriend, I'm gonna be the best son, I'm going to, land a big time job, I'm gonna get my car back, I'm gonna start making all this money, I'm going to, go to all these 12-step meetings, I'm gonna start working out, and I would have all these big plans, and I hear it with people all the time, right? It's like, I'm gonna bring my kids to school every single day, or I'm gonna become a SoundCloud rapper, or whatever their big goals are. And I never want to push people away from what their sobriety journey goals are, but to me it just starts with a foundation. And what is something you can commit to on a weekly basis that no matter what, you can check those boxes off. No matter how busy your life gets, no matter what is going on or what gets thrown at you, you can do those things. So if working out or your recovery, which should be number one focus, is a priority to you, what's a number of meetings that no matter what you can go to on a weekly basis? And that's how you build that momentum in recovery. It's just that repeatable, consistent acts that no matter what you can do. And I can get into it a little bit more later, but that's how I started my recovery journey. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, no, so I think that momentum and discipline go hand in hand, right? Because I think that when that fire starts, and I've experienced this plenty of times, I'll get the fire temporarily, right? But there's no discipline behind it, right? That action that you're talking about, that constant movement of doing what you need to do, one foot in front of the other, it fades out. So I think that discipline is a really huge part of that momentum, because again, being in treatment, I have that fire, I see people come in that have been sober 15, 20 years, and I'm like, I want to do this, but there's no action behind it, right? So very, very quickly that momentum fades, and I'm right back doing drugs again and letting down everybody I've loved, right? Or that loves me. So I think that it's that constant, put one foot in front of the other, and doing what you need to do regardless of how you feel, right? That's how I have successfully maintained momentum, right? I think that getting momentum starts for me with getting inspired, right? Getting inspired with either an idea or a person that says something, or a plan, to make more money, to grow spiritually, any number of things, right? It starts with inspiration, and it continues with discipline.
Without a doubt.
Perfect. And once you do get some momentum building, maybe you get your get well job in sober living, you're making some money, you're paying your own rent, and you're starting to build a foundation, and that fire kind of runs out, it's not that exciting anymore, you hit 60, 90 days, the pink cloud fades away. How do you maintain that momentum?
I think that's where it's really big to have some type of foundation, the no matter what's that you're not going to negotiate with yourself about. So, early on for me, it was 7 days a week. I could give up an hour a day to go to a meeting. And then, slowly I went down to 4 meetings. And to this day, that's about where I stay, is at 4 meetings a week. And I think that just makes all the other stuff in life come a lot easier, because it's not going to matter how I feel. I just know this is what I have to do and what I don't negotiate on. I know that, you know, going to the gym, you can watch a workout video or you can listen to some Eric Thomas or, you know, somebody like that, right? David Goggins, Row the Boats, and I can get super excited, but like the reality is when I start lifting those weights, I get tired and I want to stop. So like when I was starting out any goal, and you can even speak to this with your half marathon that you're running, is it's like, don't go work out for 2 hours your first day, so you're super sore, you don't come back. But like, can you for the first week go to the gym 15 minutes a day? 15 minutes, that's it, right? Maybe walk on the treadmill for 5, do some light weights for 10, and then you can take off. And if you can like build that, that routine and that discipline like Ryan talked about becomes so much easier. And in recovery, you're not gonna always feel like going to a meeting. 7 days a week becomes hard. Your life should get super busy, because if you get sober, you're gonna get a lot of things back and you're gonna have a lot of new experiences. A girlfriend who has a kid, right? Like how do I help be a stepdad to this kid, right? How do you know, do all these other things that you wanna make time for? You can do it because you have this allotted stuff that no matter what you're gonna do, it opens up all those other areas of your life. But yeah, that feeling is gonna come and go. You're gonna be super on fire one day, not so on fire the next day, but when you stop negotiating with yourself on like, these are just musts that I do no matter what, the rest becomes pretty easy.
Yeah, you touched on it. You have to be able to maintain the non-negotiables even when you don't feel like doing them. And that's always the hardest part, is breaking through that. I mean, what are your tips on how to accomplish that?
Yeah, so I think starting out for me, let's just go with the meetings, because you had talked about that, right? It's like I was able to maintain momentum later on because the foundation of it was I would go with my friends, my like-minded friends, and it was very easy at that point to do it because they're doing it, right? So the more that I did that, you know, down the road, it's like a default setting, and I'm more okay with just going by myself, right? Regardless of how I feel. Like there's when my friend Taylor died, I heard that he died an hour later. I'm at Sheriff's of Nottingham, right? Like that's not me without that foundation. Without that foundation, I'm gonna sit in my room and cry and just like wallow in self-pity. But because I have, you know, that foundation of like fellowship and that foundation of like-minded individuals that are doing the right thing and have that momentum themselves, right? That momentum is transferable, right? So now I'm doing it on my own. I'm doing it if I have like a cold. I'm doing it if I like just feel lazy that day. I'm doing it, you know, if something bad happened 2 hours ago and I'm like, I'd rather just sit here and think about that, right? It goes back to regardless of how I feel, right? And I only was able to get there because I had people around me that I visually saw doing the same thing, right? And that I was able to do things with. Right, so it became easy.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it too. So like a lot of the time in early sobriety, whether you get out of, you know, rehab and you're going to outpatient with some people that you were in rehab with, or you go into a sober living, there's a good group of people there and you like grow these friendships, these bonds, and it becomes your normal. The foundation was built with these people. Well, the reality of the matter is sometimes they don't necessarily continue on the journey as long as you might. Right, and you have to also learn how to maintain momentum if like your sober living best friend falls off the wagon, or you know, a death occurs, or whatever that looks like. I mean, what tips do you have as far as like when you lose someone that's been a huge part of your journey? How do you continue on without losing all that progress that you have built up?
I'd say two things. It's talk to God. Right, it's have a relationship with God, because if I have a relationship with God, He's gonna give me the right ideas, right, of what to do. Secondly, it's using that bad situation, that death or whatever, as a fire to continue that momentum that you have built, right? Because that shows you what happens when somebody in recovery loses momentum and starts getting complacent and doing what they want to do, right? You die, right? So instead of like letting it affect myself negatively, of course it's okay to like cry and show emotion and work through it and grieve, but am I going to, you know, go the same route he went, or am I going to live in his honor and my own, right, and do right by God and everybody else and continue on this path that I'm already on, right? It's all about perspective of how you look at it, and to use that perspective to continue on that path.
Yeah, and Wade kind of touched on it too. You know, you mentioned like there's situations where it's like, how do I be a better like stepdad in this situation? Or maybe if you're like going back to your family, it's like, how do you manage those types of relationships while also continuously working on your recovery?
I think it becomes super easy when you have the non-negotiables in place. You know, when there's just, no matter what, this is who I am, this is what I do, and you make it so it's something that you have time for the other things to come up, and there's no excuse for you to not do it, you know? And plus, I think you start to fall in love with the process, and it's easy right away when you talk about early sobriety to not see what's happening in your life. And I bring it back to this story. I don't know where I heard it, how I heard it, whatever it was, but there's a story of a guy he's sitting on a couch, right? Just rudderless, not going anywhere in life, watching TV day after day, just miserable, depressed, all the things. And one day God shows up and he says, "What are you doing? Tomorrow I'm going to put a boulder in front of your door, and every day you wake up, I want you to get up and I want you to push that boulder. Move that boulder from the door," right? And so sure enough, the guy wakes up in the morning and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I just talked to God yesterday." And he laces up the Nikes, you know. Sure enough, he opens his door and there's a huge boulder in the way, and he just starts pushing the boulder. And so 1 day passes, 2 days passes, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, a week, now 2 weeks, and he's pushing it on the 15th day, and all of a sudden the devil shows up, and the devil says, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "God came to me and told me to push this boulder." And, you know, the devil goes to him, he goes, "Don't you see, God's a sick God. You haven't moved this boulder 1 inch. You think that you can actually move this boulder? God is just playing with you. Isn't he such a sick God?" And so the guy's like, "You know, you're right." So again, he goes back to the couch, he's just being rudderless, and on the 17th day, God shows back up and says, "What are you doing? I told you to move that boulder, or push that boulder." And he goes, "God, I've been pushing it for 2 straight weeks and I haven't moved it 1 inch. And then God kind of says to him, "You know, you've been at that boulder every single day. You've been talking to me. You've been growing a relationship with me every single day. Don't you see yourself? Look at the muscles that you now have. Don't you see that you have purpose every day when you wake up, and you've been hard at work? But most importantly is look at how far me and you have come in our relationship when you sit and talk to me every day. Keep pushing the boulder. I'll move it when it's ready." And I think that's such a good thing of when you're getting up and you have that momentum, is you don't know when that boulder is going to move, right? Your job is to push it and believe that you're going to move it, but the reality is it's going to move when it's time to move. And when you have that momentum in recovery and you have that foundation where you're just doing those things, you don't know if it's your 21st meeting, if it's your 50th meeting, if it's your 100th meeting, where all of a sudden something just clicks where you don't want to get high anymore and you love the life that you're living. And when you have that happen, I don't want to give up all my meetings, right? Life can happen and I still want to go to meeting 3-4 times a week. I still want to go to church on Sundays because I know the gain in it is so much better than me giving up an hour of my life to do something else.
Oh, that's good. Ryan, you've been in recovery for about 8 years now, a little over 8 years. And in that time, you've had some relationships, some successful, some not successful. I mean, what would your thoughts be on just handling that type of situation and still maintaining your sobriety throughout it all?
Wade touched on it very well. It's the non-negotiables, right? I've experienced what it looks like when, let's just use Sheriffs of Nottingham, for example, when it was at the park, right?
It's a 12-step meeting.
Yeah, 12-step meeting.
Yeah.
It's a 12-step meeting, and it was a huge foundation for my recovery, right? When I was consistently going to that meeting, when I was consistently talking to my sponsor, when I was consistently showing up for sponsees, my relationship was good, right? Of course, there were disagreements, there were arguments, as any normal relationship, entails. But because of those non-negotiables, because of my consistency in the program, I consciously and subconsciously had the tools to walk through those arguments with grace and love rather than gaslighting, manipulation, unhealthy toxicity, right? But when I separate myself from these non-negotiables, when I separate myself from the people that do have good advice, that have been there before, then I'm left with my own devices, right? And my own devices in a relationship like that, I'll become the problem really quick, right? And it falls apart. So I mean, my advice and my tips on that is again, it all falls back on remaining consistent in the things that got us to gain that relationship in the first place, right? I wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for the momentum and the non-negotiables and the consistency of the program. I wouldn't have a successful relationship without that. I wouldn't have a mother that wants to see me without that, right? I wouldn't have any of these things. So that has to remain the same, right, in order for all these other things to work out successfully. And if they don't work out successfully, they just weren't meant to happen, right? But the goal is, if it's not going to work out, it's not going to be because I caused it to happen. It's because it wasn't God's will, right? So yeah.
Yeah, you both combined have well over a decade of like recovery amongst you two, and I'm sure throughout those spans of time, there's been moments where you've lost momentum, you maybe got stagnant, or like you overall just stopped doing what you need to do, and you have to rebuild it, right? If you don't rebuild the momentum, eventually it all comes crumbling down. What was I saying? Oh, you lose momentum, you gotta build it back up. Lose momentum, build it back up. Go ahead.
With losing momentum and building it back up?
Yep, losing momentum, building it back up.
So I think the biggest thing when you lose momentum and you have to build it back is, again, just like when you started, is not biting off more than you can chew. Just going back to the very basics of recommitting to what your goals are. And I think as you get a little bit more time in sobriety, luckily, we're all still only one drink or one bad decision away from absolutely ruining our lives. But I think when you get a little bit more time under your belt and you have a little bit more of a foundation built, what it does allow you to see is those warning signs coming, right? The yellow flags start turning into red flags, and you start seeing that at an early enough time that says, hey, I got to get back to going into a meeting. I got to recommit to my home group. I have to, start going to church every single Sunday. Those little things that, again, when you look at it in perspective, it's, an hour here, an hour there, and the benefits of it pay off so much more. But it just starts again with, there was a time where I was going to the gym all the time, right? I was in probably the best shape. And then I got comfortable, started going out to eat more, the diet goes off, all that type of stuff. And then it's just like, how do I restart this? I just start by going back to the gym. I start by recommitting of saying, hey, like Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, I'm going to go back to the gym. Or I'm going to get a trainer so like I'm guaranteed to show up 3 days a week to the gym. And I start there. And then once that momentum starts building, it becomes easier. And it's no different than the first time you learn PEMDAS, right? You look at this thing and you're like, I don't know how to do this. And it takes you an hour and a half to figure it out. And you're trying to solve the equation. And then all of a sudden you've done that so many times that like the second the math problem is in front of you, you already know, right? Like,
break down PEMDAS first.
Don't do that to me. Don't do that to me on parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract.
Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, dude.
Yeah, so that. I always like to equate it to football. That's what I like to equate it to, is like if you look at Peyton Manning when he was a rookie, he had 2 plays. Find Marvin Harrison or hand the ball off to Tetra James.
And a lot of people forget Peyton Manning set the record for most interceptions thrown in a rookie season.
Without a doubt. But the guy had really 2 plays. That's like what he was doing. And then you look at Peyton Manning after he's played so many games when he's in Denver, and he goes up to the line and he looks at what they're doing, and now this dude has so many audibles because he knows what's happening in real time because he's seen everything. And like that's what recovery begins to look like, is you've had so much time that you start seeing these things come and you're like, oh man, like this is kind of shaky waters, like I better switch it up and do this here, right? Like I better stop going down this path in this relationship or this whatever it is, because like I see this is headed to trouble.
Right.
And then that allows you to kind of backtrack and then rebuild momentum in the right areas of your life. And then it just becomes easy. You can do all the other things, and it takes a less amount of time to do it in that period.
What are some of those warning signs to look out for that you are losing momentum?
I mean, it's the typical, like, no, I'd rather just hang out at the house and watch TV than go to my non-negotiable meeting, right? Or not calling my mentors or sponsor because, like, I think I have the right idea, right? Just falling into, complacency and comfortability, I think. I think the moment that I'm super comfortable is a warning sign in itself, right? You always want to say somewhat uncomfortable. in any given situation. Because I mean, it's a very cringeworthy quote, but there's no growth in the comfort zone, right? I just backtrack when I'm in the comfort zone. So the only way to move forward and keep that momentum, on fire is to keep myself in some sense of like uneasiness, right? In a good way, in like a positive way. Because in that uneasiness, I'm more likely to do reflection, and to self-accountability, reach out to people that have been there before, those types of situations, rather than, I'm not going to do that if I'm doing the same thing day after day after day after day that doesn't give any real purpose and growth to my life.
Why don't you both share one example of a time where you did get stagnant and like a real world scenario of like you getting it back, and then what the result was?
I would say, a little over a year ago, I was in this. I can think of two instances absolutely perfect. First instance was I have just gotten a year of sobriety. My life is going absolutely amazing. Work is going good. My sobriety is obviously going great. I have all these friends and relationships. I'm playing sober softball. I'm doing all of these like cool activities. And now all of a sudden, things don't really work out with my ex-fiance at the time, or like it's not really the direction that I'm going to go. And I'm like, well, I'm going to get back in the dating world. Like I got all these things going for me. I'm going to start plugged in recovery and like the sober living. And I start getting busy. I start getting on dating apps. I start doing all of these things, right? And I start noticing like I'm not going to the same amount of meetings anymore. And these non-negotiables of like going to church and stuff maybe start falling off at the wayside. And it wasn't that anything bad took place, but what I realized is like the person that I was becoming, maybe caring more what I looked like on social media or like what I was posting, or, I just started getting dumb ideas in my head of like TikTok was really blowing up at the time. It's like, well, maybe I should quit this job and I should just like start doing TikTok. And, I get like crazy ideas. And then if I don't have a sponsor where I'm like at least calling and being like, this is what I'm thinking. He's like, dude, you're fucking crazy. Like you are delusional. Maybe you should go to a meeting. And I think like that's one time I really, really saw it. And of course, then I get back in the program and I start seeing, how delusional I really am. And then the other time I would say is about a year and a half ago. Again, like the business is taking off, and the same old adage is you just get too busy to do the stuff that worked, right? And what it looks like for me is I start getting short with people. My behavior becomes super selfish. Like I become too busy and like my time's too important and all of that type of stuff. And it's really easy to forget about all the little things that helped you build up to like have that success. And then all of a sudden what ends up happening is I have all these things that I'm like trying so hard to protect, right? Like I'm trying so hard to just squeeze and control, and like everybody should act this way and then I'll be happy, right? The actor scenario at its greatest. And then what I find is like I'm struggling just to survive, when the whole time the way I got there was just by like doing the right thing, and everything seemed to just work itself out in the end. And I don't have to try, I don't have to struggle. And like that exact same thing happened. I had to recommit to, going to my meetings. I had to recommit to going to church. I had to do little things like that. One thing I'd really like to get back into is like Celebrate Recovery. I've kind of fallen off there. Mondays have gotten really tough for me just because of my schedule. And like, it's little things like that, it's such a short period of time during the day, but like I said, the exponential results, you like cannot quantify how much good comes from that.
That's good.
Mine got bad, so it sounds like Wade kind of like, nipped it in the bud before, similar circumstance, right? Like me and my ex-fiance, we separate, right? I do the whole dating thing, right? And I get so focused on myself, right? So focused on my image. I'm going to the gym 7 days a week. I'm so borderline narcissistic, just and so insecure at the same time that like I have to look my best, physical health, dress wise, and I'm negating, all these internal growth, opportunities, right? Because that didn't work out for a reason. So why am I not taking a look at myself, right? But now I'm just hiding in, dating, the gym, all these things that can be good, but not when it's taken to the extreme, like it was with me, right? And what ended up happening is I become a very dishonest, manipulative, self-seeking person, and everything goes south, right? And I have friends that are telling me in the meantime, hey, you should check yourself, and I don't, right? So there's consequences to those actions, right? Friends want to stay away from you because obviously they don't want to be around a negative influence, a negative, person, right? I stopped going to meetings because I become resentful. Why'd they stop hanging out with me, and shit gets bad, right? And it didn't get to a point, it changed when it got to a point that like I was sitting in my house by myself and I'm just like, what am I doing? I'm causing harm in every aspect of my life. People don't want to be around me, right? So thank God I had enough of a foundation in recovery to reach out to, my sponsor and the people that are going to shoot us straight and say, I'm sorry, what do I do? Right? And when I was able to get vulnerable like that and say, what do I do instead of, oh, I need to do this, then I was able to take these suggestions and I was honest and transparent, started doing things for myself like therapy, redoing the steps, doing, ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, looking internally to what's causing me to escape, these issues and unhealthy scenarios, right? And fix my life, right? And when I was able to do that, I was able to get back to the things that got me to where I was successful in the first place in every aspect of my life. So it's really, for me, it's getting vulnerable enough to take suggestions from others and being honest, right? Being honest about where I'm at. Because if I'm dishonest about where I'm at and I lie to people and I tell them everything's okay, I'm never going to get better, right? And I'm never going to build that momentum back.
And I think the important part to like look at in that situation, in both these situations, right, is that momentum is not just necessarily like you think of it as like this snowball that's rolling downhill, right? And that doesn't mean that you're not going to pick up a few rocks and a couple things in your snow that you really don't want in your snow, right? But like, I think if you're contemplating starting getting sober, it's not that you're not going to make any more mistakes. Like, you're going to make mistakes, and like that ride is not going to be just this smooth sailing downhill thing, right? You might take a turn, you might get clipped by a tree, right? And lose half yourself, whatever it is. But like, the important thing is starting, and it's the same thing in like business, right? Like, we joke around a little bit about like building the plane as it's in the air, but at the same time, there's the non-negotiables, right? Like people's safety, compliance, like things like that, that it's just like, you have to do these things because like those are the most important. But like, you don't have to have the answer to everything right away. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm of the value of start wherever you are, just start. You're going to make mistakes. Whether you make 10 mistakes instead of only 4, it doesn't really matter. You're going to make those mistakes and you're going to learn the process enough during that time that like you're going to be so far ahead of the person who waited, a year, 18 months, 2 years to start. Just because you made those extra 6 mistakes or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because like what you're going to learn in that period is going to put you so exponentially ahead by just starting. Right? Like, whether it's unveiling like that we're going to do an IOP or this stuff, like, are we ready? I don't know how to do that, but like, I know we'll figure it out and we'll make mistakes. And me like sitting there and waiting another 6 months, a year, 2 years to do it isn't going to help anybody. I'm not going to learn anything. That like, I'm probably not going to make another mistake, maybe save some money, but what does that cost in waiting that long, Yeah. So like, it's not this linear downhill thing. You're going to clip a couple trees, you might lose half your snowball, but you're going to keep rolling and pick it right back up.
Yeah. That's the thing about gravity. It'll keep you going.
It'll keep you going.
Yeah. Great episode. I hope you guys got some good insight into what it looks like, real world experience of trying to build and maintain momentum and just overall progress in your recovery journeys and your lives in general. Next week, we will be having Jennifer Evans on. She just accepted a really big role with the Phoenix Rescue Mission. So we're super excited to kind of learn about what she's going to be doing there. It'll be a little bit more of a faith-based episode too, if that's your jam. Kind of get into what that looks like in your recovery from that aspect. Subscribe to the channel. We're like 3 subscribers away from 100, so that's pretty good. Follow us, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Thank you guys.
Thank you, dude.
And we'll see you next week.